ladies, what's going on, guys? I hope everyone is having a fantastic Tuesday. Tonight is really exciting. It's kind of like a little mini kickoff to the free 5-day challenge that's happening next week. Oh, I'm super jazzed about it. It's also a talk. I've done this talk before once in June, and it was, again, a kickoff to that free 5-day challenge that I did then, and it went over so freaking well. So I decided that I wanted to do it again. And anytime whenever I talk about stuff, it's not like I really have a full game plan of everything. I have kind of like talking points. So I'm sure you'll hear different things, even if you listen to the one that was in June. So stoked to have you guys on tonight. Stoked to talk about climbing. Climbing is a huge thing, especially for mountain bikers, because we have to go up to go down, unless you live at a bike park or somebody else that just drives you shuttles. So it's part of our riding. It's part of how we get up to have fun going down, and it's part of our fitness. Some of what we can do to climb to climb better is to change our position and our posture on the bike. So we're going to be going over a couple different things in regards to that. One, our traction. So like how our two tires stay grounded, how where we're getting our power from, where we're getting our driving from, and then how our upper body is attaching down to it. All of these things come together for our climbing posture, for our climbing position. For climbing, for biking in general, one of the things that we need is we look at how we attach ourselves to the ground. For walking, we attach ourselves to the ground via our feet. For biking, it's through our tires. And so we have to look at where our weight is distributed, where we are putting the different things. And so if we are fully weighted on our front tire and then we pedal down through, what do you think is going to happen? We're probably going to spin out. All of our power that we just sent into this rear wheel is going to slide through. We're going to lose our traction, and then we're going to have to put our foot down. Sucks, doesn't it? Happen to everybody. Happens to me, especially like wet routes, or if I just get too far forward on the bike. Happens to a lot of us. Another thing that can happen with regards to our weight distribution is that we'll actually get too far back. We won't get over top of our front wheel, and/or we'll pull our front wheel. So when it comes to having that traction for it, as we're on the bike, we need to be able to weight our front wheel. Otherwise, it starts popping up, especially if we're going to pull through it. And I'll talk about one of the reasons why we might be pulling through it. And so if we're really powering through and we're kind of back here, then we might not keep our front wheel planted. And then if we're too far forward, then we're just going to spin through and not keep our rear wheel planted. And so this becomes a huge issue for our climbing, because if we can't give our power in through the wheels, then we're not going to keep going forward up that trail. We're not going to get over those roots, those rocks. We're not going to be able to transfer what's happening through our hips, through our legs, through our butt, through our core, down to the bike. And that's going to mean that you can't actually go up. There were some ladies that were talking whenever they were wanting to do the free 5-day challenge, is that they've had crashes from climbing. A couple of those can be that you have to stop because you can't generate enough power. There's some just bigger obstacles, and you need some other different techniques and different ways of lifting the front wheel to replace it up and over. We're not going to quite go into that today. I think that's more for on the trail type gig of helping with that, or more advanced video than what I can do in this room. And so one of the other ways that you can crash whenever you are climbing is that you'll actually lift your front wheel up, and that will cause you to have to step off the bike really quickly, and you'll kind of do that type of gig. I've been there. I've lifted my front wheel up before. Anybody else? Has anybody else done that? Where you accidentally lifted your front wheel up and you're like, oh no, climbing, I can't do this. And so making sure that we're putting our weight over top of that front wheel. while also keeping traction on the back is one of the hardest things to do. So one of the things that you can think about on the bike for that is what's grounding you and how you actually place more weight on that front wheel. Sometimes as we're climbing, we'll end up getting in this position here. When you're like, okay, that's not too bad. Well, I'm not actually as far forward as I could be if I just straightened out my back. Now you see how my chin is over top of my stem. That's also one of the things that they talk about, or coaches talk about, that we talk about, is that we want your chin over top of your stem. And that means that you're weighting in, you're loading through your front wheel. You're loading your hands through that. Also, one thing to think about, if you're here and you're rounded and you want to try to lift and load that front wheel, a lot of times you'll lift up those shoulders to get there. And you'll end up climbing like this. I was just talking to Nell, my friend. That's one of the things that I end up doing, is that I'll actually even be hinged, but then my front part will start to go, and I'll start to use more of my upper abs to get that climbing stability, control aspect, and then I'll encroach up on my neck. And we were doing some sessioning the other day, and I was like, man, gotta really focus on my posture with this. I climb so much better when I am more hinged, aka I'm using more of my trunk control, both back and front, which I consider all of this core. I can weight my hands appropriately enough through this, and I'm not bringing my shoulders up to my neck. One of the things that does is it does extend your weight forward a little bit, but it puts pressure on so much other stuff up here. Has anyone ever got to the top of their climb and they're like, man, I have a headache. My neck is so tight. You might be doing this. You might have this aspect, and it might be good if somebody even takes a video of you, or if you just think about hinging more at your hips and then bringing those shoulder blades down your rib cage. Now I feel so much more supported through my shoulders for other various reasons, and I can now place more weight on this front tire as I need to. Also, what that does with that trunk and core support is it sets you up for success for your legs. We're going to get into that just in a second when it comes to how we're driving and powering our rear wheel. But making sure that we're getting over top of here, as if it's really significantly steep, getting over top of there and opening up that chest, getting those shoulder blades down, and now you can put pressure through your hands as you need to. It's not your hands either holding you up or pulling you so you can drive other things down through here. One other aspect within this is your lungs, your rib cage expansion and contraction. As we breathe, just everyone take a deep breath right now. What happens? Your ribs expand, and they expand out forward, they can expand out the side, you can expand out backwards, your belly moves a little bit too. All of this area fills up with air and then compresses and lets the air out. Fills up with air and compresses and lets the air out. Well, if we slouch when we're on the bike like this, then I'm not going to be able to take as big a breath as air. As big of a breath of air. And so I want everybody that's watching this, listening to this, I want you to slouch. Now take a deep breath. It's really hard, isn't it? But if you sit up nice and straight, now take a deep breath. It's such a big difference. And so a lot of us have issues with our lungs whenever we ride. We have issues with oxygen exchange. A couple of us have asthma. A couple of us have other different breathing issues, heart issues. And so we want to give ourselves the best potential oxygen exchange possible. Well, that can be done just simply by our posture. simply by not slouching, and as we're going up the climb, not being like this, but instead being like this, where you drive those shoulder blades, again, down your rib cage, you hinge more from your hips, and you have that straighter back. Now you can take that deep breath. You can actually get better oxygen exchange through there. And so not only are you able to wait and keep traction here, not pull up from it, load that front wheel as you need to, have better control over it if you do need to do a lifting up mechanism. But for going over more technical stuff, to be able to do a maneuver, you now have that ability. You have that control. And it all just becomes from the difference of here versus here. It's incredible the difference that can make in your riding just by making that simple adjustment. It's all making sense for how you can change that position and posture of being here versus being here. I know it's super hard to think about that whenever we're climbing because we're just gassed out doing everything else. But changing that one thing and activating your core as like your corset is huge. And so as you're doing different exercises, as you're doing different even rides, thinking about that hinge mechanism of how to get your chest over top of your bars, or as Lindsay Richter says in the Ladies All Ride, get your boobs over your bars. And that's what she's looking for, like reaching those guys. If you had like laser beams coming out, like think about where they would hit. So if you have laser beams coming off, things like that feels funny, coming off, then they're going up. If I'm slouched, now they're like going towards my feet. And so I don't want that. I want them coming just straight off. Make sure you're pointing in that right direction for those guys. This is the first time I've talked about that for sure. All right, so weighting that front wheel, making sure that we're getting that. Now let's talk about if you want to pull from your front wheel, because that brings us back down into our core and our hips and our legs. So a lot of times as we think about what's happening through here, we think about where we're getting our power from. So if we're on two wheels as our base of support, what's pushing down into the ground, we now think about what from our body is going into the bike. And so our feet are pedaling. And so they're going back and forth. That's where our force is going into the bike to make it move forward. We have to generate that force from somewhere. We have to generate it from part of our body. Now, we can generate it, one, from a pull of our bike. Every time we put a pedal stroke down, you feel like you want to pull one side and then the other side. That's like a counterbalancing of your trunk. So your hips and your legs can do the power and push it down and basically do a pedal stroke. But we don't want to affect our front wheel that much when we're doing a lot of climbing. It's okay if you're out of the saddle and you're like starting to get going again. You kind of wiggle your body and you start pedaling to get off and go. But when we're just trying to steer, when we're trying to do other things with our front wheel, we don't want to pull from it as our base of support, as our method of generating the power. We want that power to come through here. And so if you find yourself wanting to pull, a lot of time that's a lack of core strength or a lack of core motor control, aka the ability to use here instead of an arm pull to generate that power. Because then we need that power to push down and around for our pedal stroke. And that brings us into our next main point of where we're generating our power from and to, and how we're using some of that force for our back tire. So whenever we are thinking about where we're generating our power from, I talked about the core. And now let's move it into what actually makes the pedal go round. So we have our quads, that's a really big impact and big support through it. We also have our glutes. That's another huge aspect of it. And we also have our hamstrings and our calves. All of those play a huge role into what happens with generating that force in a round. A lot of times when we think about pushing the pedal down, we literally just think about that. We think about pushing it down and then the other guy goes down. And it's like this pogo. Well, guys, this thing goes around in a circle for a reason. I know that's backwards. But it goes around in a circle for a reason. And so it's not just a pushing, it's a pull as well. And it's not just thinking about straightening your knee. This is when we get into what muscles are you using and why. And so if we think about just a pushing, then I'm just straightening my knee through here. I'm not going to utilize a whole lot of glutes. But if I think about my thigh going down, if I think about that mechanism, I'll tie in my glutes, I'll tie in my hamstrings, and it will do more of a circular movement of my leg versus just a knee straightening. And so to get more glutes to fire, to get more hamstrings to fire, one of the things you can think about in of itself is don't think about your knee doing it. Think about your thigh doing it. I know it sounds so close in proximity of straightening your knee versus moving your thigh around in a circle. Or you can almost think about your knee going in a circular pattern instead of just in a down and up pattern. And so this breaks it down to thinking about what's happening during a squat. And so what happens during a squat, if you try to just keep your body so upright, a lot of times you'll use just more quads. Well, we're going to be over top of that front bar. And now I want you to think about doing the squat from here. Now you'll actually tie in and use your glutes more instead of just your quads. Instead of just tying those guys in. We need you to use all the muscles that you have down there. I need you to use not only your quads, also your glutes, also your hamstrings, and your calf muscles. All of those guys play a role into making that pedal go round. And so you don't just use your quads. It's the easiest to use your quads if you do not use your core. Because then you'll be in a slouched position on the bike, and then it's harder to activate and to use other different muscles that you have because of your slouched posture. If you use your core with it, then you will be able to use your glutes and your hamstrings as well as your quads for that movement, for that mechanism. Also, you will typically keep your rear wheel, it's such a hard thing for me to say, you'll keep that rear wheel loaded and traction on it better. Because as you hip hinge, usually butt goes back a little bit, chest goes forward a little bit. And so on the bike, if I come through here and I have that good posture to weight my front wheel, typically I'm going to have my rear wheel weighted as well for that power and that control going around. If I sag through here, then I'm not going to be able to target a lot of these muscles and have that good seating power through my saddle to give me that power. So keeping our traction through both our front wheel and our back wheel is how we really make sure that we don't spin out. Making sure that we have our chest down as low as we need it to be to have weight through that front, be grounded through that, and then also to keep weight on our rear tire. It's making sure you hinge through that versus just stand up through it. Making sure that we are driving through these. So one of you guys asked about little roots and rocks. One of the things that you need to do within those is that you need to lift up out of your saddle just ever so slightly, because we need the back tire, we need our bike to move underneath of us a little bit. Our legs and our arms are extensions of our suspension. And so sometimes we need to help our suspension out by lifting up and out of the saddle a little bit, by making sure that the bike can move up and over those different things, and that we're putting the appropriate amount of pressure through that to not spin out over those roots and to not just slam into them. Because if we slam into them, we lose a little bit of our forward momentum, and then our tire can't grip as well and has more of a trouble going over top of it. It doesn't seat into that root, doesn't seat into that rock so it can catch and give ourselves more forward traction through that. Tire pressure can also play a role into it as well, and if you run tubeless. And so making sure that your suspension and your tire pressure setup is good and good for you and your bike setup is super helpful within that as well. Climbing is so dynamic. There's so many different things going on with it of what you need to be doing. I mean, how we haven't even talked about where you're looking and other aspects of that. And there's just a lot. While we're talking about it for 5 days next week. So within that, as you lift up and as you're driving, it's making sure that you don't lift up this way so much that you lift almost like straight up out of the saddle. And so then you're still keeping that load on the rear tire. You're not moving the load more forward of the bike, so now the rear tire doesn't have as much traction through it. Now you just loaded your front tire more. And so as you're doing those little, going over those little lifts, those little rocks, those little roots, doing that lift up will help you to have clearance for your bike to move underneath of you, to be able to still propel you forward, and you still have it loaded through there. That's why coming up in that hip hinge is super important for you. Now, all of these techniques are more so for steeper climbs, steeper switchbacks, climbing over more technical things. If you're cruising on a gravel road, you don't need to be here in your position and climbing up that gravel road. Relax a little bit, have a little bit more upright posture. You don't need to be that loaded. And so making sure that this is not the only position that you need to be in. You can move in and out of it. Hell, sometimes I'll just stand up on the bike and pedal like this as I'm going up a gravel road, or just really sit back and just barely hang on to my handlebars and pedal like that. Movement is a key thing within any type of riding. Clip pedals. Is there any difference between those? Not a whole lot for this. One of the things that you can do with flats that you can't do with clipless is that you can move your foot around on the bike or on the pedal. And so the more that you move your foot forward on the pedal, the more that you'll be able to drive through your heels. Have you ever been told drive through your heels with a squat or with a deadlift? It's because it triggers in your posterior chain. And so this was like actually the last thing I was going to be talking about today is foot position on your pedal. And so for clipless, or where you're clipping into it to the bike, then you can't move your pedal. Like you can't move your foot around on the pedal. It's one place, it stays there and you go. You can drag it a little bit more, like you're getting dog poop off your shoe. You can drag it, and that's what can trigger in your hamstrings a little bit more because you're pulling more. You can also do that with your flats. I do it a lot with mine. I have just sometimes that I just want my hamstrings to get a workout, and so I'll just really focus on my pull of my pedal stroke. But for those who ride flats, as you have your pedal on, or your foot on the pedal, if you have where your heel is more, or your pedal is more towards your heel, then you can trigger in more of your posterior chain, aka your glutes and your hamstrings, just based on where your force is going into the pedal. If you have the pedal more towards your toes, you will use more of your quads. And so this goes for both clipless and for flats. If you feel like you need a little bit more posterior chain, aka butt and hamstrings working as you're climbing, move back where your pedal and your foot interface. So for clipless, move back where your cleat is on your shoe. Make it as far back as you can, obviously within reason. Don't do anything fast, but the farther back you get, the more that you'll get more of that posterior chain. Same thing for you guys. If you have flats, just try on a gravel road or a nice easy climb. Move your foot around. See how it feels. Does it change things for you? Typically it will. Going around uphill switchbacks, that's spinning out in sand. Sand one is hard. And so you might need a little bit of momentum for it, and also to gauge when you're going to put down your force. This is also where gearing comes in a little bit. Making sure you're in a hard enough gear where as you put the force down through your pedal, it's not going to be so fast for your rear wheel. And so you'll actually use those parts of your tire. It won't just slide across the actual part that you want to grab. It goes slow enough and strong enough where it can propel you forward from that. Because if I have this surface here and it goes my rear wheel goes super fast over top of it, then nothing will keep me having traction on it. I needed a higher gear, or where it's harder for me to pedal to make my rear wheel go. I always forget high and low. A little bit of my dyslexia probably. But it's where it's not easy for you to pedal. It's a little bit harder for you to pedal. And that means that your rear wheel won't go so fast. It'll go slower and able to bite and keep your traction. Just think about a dog running on wood floor. If a dog goes in a nice, good pace on the wood floor, they keep their traction. But if they get really excited and they go really fast, they're going to lose their traction. It's just because they were going really fast and mattering of how fast your rear wheel is spinning to keep that traction for you. Maureen says, heard you can move your foot forward to climb. It's not also that you need to do more of your foot forward. I guess it is technically then. Sometimes I think people think about having their foot forward means their pedal is forward on their foot. It's moving pedal back comparatively to foot through that. You just did Katsuma, Aaron. You did this presentation yesterday. It's a lot. Katsuma is a hard challenge for those of you that are around Asheville, North Carolina. All right, ladies, so let's wrap it up. So going over traction. Basic thing within your posture is a hip hinge. It's understanding how to weight and load your front wheel, how to keep your traction on your back wheel for that, where you are keeping and gaining your force from, which is your core, so then your legs can work, including your glutes and your hamstrings, not just your quads. Also going over where your foot is on the pedal, moving it foot forward on the pedal or pedal back compared to the foot, so you're pushing more towards your heel. This doesn't mean that you need to be like all heel on the pedal, it's just movement towards that. Also making sure that you don't slouch as you're doing this on the bike, that you keep that chest nice and open. You can breathe better through that. And also you won't be using so much of these lovely upper trap muscles that I have that are beasts. So that wraps up this climbing posture kind of presentation. And if you want to join the free challenge that starts next week, let me know. Just comment challenge below. I'll shoot you over the link and you can get some more details on that. Otherwise, thanks so much, ladies. I hope you have a fantastic night and I hope this was super helpful for you. Bye, guys.